Bienvenidos de nuevo a Oportunidades en Grecia, el podcast en el que tratamos de acercar a las oportunidades que en el marco de la internacionalización, de la exportación, la inversión y la captación de financiación, Grecia presenta para la empresa española. Welcome again to Oportunidades en Grecia, the podcast where we try to present business opportunities regarding exports and investments in the country, Greece, to Spanish companies. Today, we will talk about the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the BERD. We will talk to its head of Greece, Angeliki Kalligiannaki. Angeliki, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Jorge. How are you? Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for the invitation.
Thanks a lot and welcome. It's great to have you here. Angeliki is someone with a very long career in the financial sector, with 11 plus years working at the Bank, BERD, out of which almost 7 in its office in Athens. Let me briefly frame the discussion before we get to see what is the history of the BERD here in Greece and its activity and so on and so forth. Greece went through some tough times at the late 2000s, early 2010s. It went through 3 economic adjustment programs, which it exited very successfully, I would say, in 2018. Right afterwards, 4 years of enhanced surveillance, which ended in August 2022, which I would say Greece exited also very successfully. All along this trajectory, there was plenty of funding which was actually linked somehow to structural reforms that these days, I think, explain the late evolution of its economy, with very good data in the last years regarding growth, employment, inflation, fiscal policy, debt ratio, with a couple things or aggregates to follow maybe, current accounts and FDI. And where does the BERD fit in all of this? Well, let me just say it opened shop in 2015 in Athens. So let's just get going with the Q&A with Angeliki. Angeliki, I would like to ask you about the history of the bank, of BERD, and more explicitly about the mandate that the bank had in the period 15-19 and the mandate it has now for the period 2025. And more specifically, I would like to ask you about different sectors or activities that seem to be very important. Private sector, sustainable energy and infrastructure, and the resilience of the financial sector.
Thank you very much, Jorge. First of all, thank you for presenting some positive data for Greece. It's true, and we all agree that Greece is in the right trajectory for sustainable and stable growth for the years ahead. So thanks for presenting all this for the listeners. Before I start for our what is BERD, let me say a few things, because you said that BERD came to Greece in 2015. It was actually the time, a little bit reflecting on all the data you presented, when most of the people, FDI, international players, etc., were leaving the country. So we came when everybody else was leaving. And this is part of our mandate and role in all the economies that we invest. So BERD is an international financial institution, a development bank that was founded in 1991 with the fall of the Berlin Wall, initially to support and bring market economies to the ex-Soviet world. Since then, our role and footprint has expanded a lot. We are currently investing in more than 40 economies in 3 continents, all the way from Mongolia to Egypt, Jordan, in places like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and in Central Europe, Romania, Bulgaria. So we have a wide map of countries where we can invest. And at the same time, our shareholding structure is interesting as well. We have 78 countries are our shareholders, including the European Union and EIB, which actually are larger shareholders.
I will actually ask you a little bit later about how you coordinate your activity with those international financial institutions, with the EIB, with the European Commission.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We can go back to it later, but you can imagine how close we are with all these institutions as they are part of our shareholding. We are aspire and we plan to expand in sub-Saharan Africa. We have 6 countries that we are going to be able to finance projects within the next couple of years. So you see how the map is evolving. We came to Greece in 2015, and at the same time, a year before, we expanded to Cyprus. We stayed there for 5 years, and in Greece, we are almost here a decade. Since 2015, the bank has adopted the GET approach, which is a methodology to measure our environmental benefit of our projects. And basically, we aspire that our projects limit the CO2 intensity in the economy, limits the vulnerability of physical risks. We have seen in the country, in Greece, what happened with the floods. So physical risks are become more and more important, an area that for us is critical. And we try to invest in projects that they are leading in low lock-in risk, CO2 lock-in risks. So you can imagine whatever in renewable energy, electric vehicles, all these are low lock-in risk projects that are high priority for us. Since 2022, all our operations, all our projects have to be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. So all the 3 elements we mentioned before, limit CO2 intensity, address climate risks, and respond to and finance projects with a low lock-in risk. The aspiration of the bank and the institution is to become a majority green bank by 2025, and actually have already achieved this. Indicatively, in 2024, across all our operations, 58% of all our projects were in green transition. So it was a record year for the institution. We invested 16.6 billion across all our economies, across the 40 countries we mentioned before, and with a high GET ratio we mentioned before. So very high share of green investments across our countries. So our mandate in Greece, as we discussed, we are almost here for a decade. And our activity has been diverse in 3 categories. Operationally, meaning financing of projects, advisory support, as well as policy dialogue. In terms of financing initially, and the first 5 years were mainly as we were viewed and we played the role of a crisis response institution. So our very first project in the country was the recapitalization of the Greek banks, and all related, crisis response financing in the beginning. And then, as the economy improved, all the data you provided, we moved into more niche areas, meaning green financing, sustainable development, and we can later on give you highlight of our investments in the country so you understand better how we implemented our strategy. And from 2020 onwards until today, again, we are focusing and we are responding and financing projects where we are needed. We have internally a concept called additionality. So we are only there in projects that we are needed to fill the financing gap. And we know in Greece it has been significant. This was our role historically. In terms of policy dialogue, we have supported the Greek government in the development of capital market strategy. and in particular related to green matters in the development of capital markets. And we have also worked with the Ministry of Energy in the regulatory framework for offshore wind. And I know this is something probably particularly interesting for Spanish companies.
It's all very interesting because, of course, I always had in my mind that you do somehow coordinate with other actors, other players in the country when it comes to funding operations. But I didn't. It seems to me that when it comes to policy dialogue, there is also a certain coordination because some of the areas where you've been working are areas of interest also for all the players, right?
Absolutely.
Whether the European Commission and others.
And this exactly reflects our activity on the advisory side. You know very well it has been a novel framework, a landmark project for us. We are working together with the Greek government. We designed it together. Is the Greek PPP preparation facility. We are currently managing 13 projects worth of 2.5 billion of investments, capex investments, in critical infrastructure areas like e-mobility, waste and water management, and we have recently added, green ferries, so all in critical areas. And we have been asked through the year several times, how do we support SMEs? And again, through our advisory work, we have a program for providing advisory support to SMEs, and we have to date supported more than 250 Greek SMEs on the ground.
SME is a little bit the word of the game, I guess. It's one of the mottos of your activity, right? Facilitating the expansion of the private sector, and I guess more specifically, although of course also medium and big ones, but more specifically SMEs. I guess.
Jorge, you've been on the ground for a long time. It's your second time actually in Greece. You have seen the whole evolution, and you know very well how important are SMEs for the Greek economy. We unfortunately are not able, to finance many 1 million projects. So we have found alternative ways to support SMEs, either through advisory or through investments in local private equity funds. We have invested in more than 10 local private equities, one of which is a venture, a VC-focused one. And through those, we support the SMEs. So directly and indirectly, plus with some financing where we are needed. But we are not an SME bank. We try to deliver impact, and it's true very often you deliver impact with larger projects, with sponsors that they have the firepower and the capacity to invest in critical areas.
Which is where I guess the other sectors come in. Participating or helping at the time, maybe enhancing the resilience of the financial sector, the big players in the market, obviously, and supporting sustainable energy and infrastructure projects, which are also the big ones, right?
And probably if we can give a bit of a story to the listeners. As I said in the beginning, we have invested in the recapitalization of the Greek banks in the very early days in 2015. However, since then, we have supported the Greek banks in the whole process in strengthening the capital structure. So we have invested in MRELs, we have invested in synthetic structures, all of which lead to a strong banking system that we have right now, and one that have altered and is able to function on its own and serve the economy.
I think you just opened the door for my next question, which is actually if you could elaborate a little bit more on the activity to date, right? So the current portfolio, you could give us far detail on financial institutions, although we mentioned already most probably the big 4 or 5 institutions in the country. If you could tell us about maybe some examples or the part of your portfolio that is in industry, commerce, and agribusiness. If you could talk to us a little bit on sustainable infrastructure.
Sure. So as we said, we are here in Greece almost a decade. Greece is not a traditional country for EBRD. So we came here with a mandate, particular as a crisis response, and we have worked and we have built a portfolio of 8.3 billion So we have invested in total in the Greek economy more than 8.3 billion in 10 years in more than 130 projects. Part of the 8.3 billion, of course, refers to our trade facilitation program through the banks. We have supported exports with our trade facilitation instrument that is available through the Greek banks. But we have also directly invested in projects across the capital structure. In 2024, just to give an idea to the audience on our activity, the last year, we invested 460 or 470 million across 15 operations. And lately, our focus is a lot on equity, direct equity, co-investments, private equity funds, so in instruments that we are needed the most. And we feel that the equity gap in Greece is still significant, while on the debt side, we see that the Greek banks are very well responding. In terms of in the energy sector, we have financed. I'll give you some examples because the listeners can resonate probably better. We have financed the larger at the time renewable solar panel by Hellenic in Kozani. So in
a huge one.
Yes, it was the largest at the time, and also in an area that investments are very much needed with the closing of the lignite plants. We have invested equity in PPC to support the transition into a low-carbon pathway. We have financed the CCGT project of Mytilineos, and we have also been very active in green real estate development. Together with our partner Demand, which is a real estate developer, we have a joint venture in which we have invested more than 70 million to date. In the repositioning and urban regeneration projects, Piraeus Tower is an example, Papastratos building, another one. So landmark projects in Greece. While we have also invested with equity in Lambda development for the materialization of the Hellinikon project, a very important investment that will transform Greece further. And recently, in 2024, we invested equity in Skyline, which is a portfolio of assets, almost 460 buildings of several uses that will be repositioned, repurposed, and enhance the green credentials.
Well, I think there are a ton of alternative activities which you fund that could be sectors actually of interest for Spanish companies at a certain point, which is basically the purpose of the conversation, so that they can know what's happening, what the bank is funding, where is the activity, and maybe figure out how to participate in those sectors.
Jorge,
yes.
Before we move, I think it's also important to note that in the past 10 years that we are here in Greece, we are the largest institutional investor in the debt capital market. So we have invested in more than 1.7 billion in both local bonds and also Euro bonds issued by Greek corporates. I remember it was summer 2016 when we invested in the very first local corporate bond of Roulis. And then there is a story of how, then Mytilineos came and many others. And we were really there and very keen to support the local capital markets.
You are just anticipating the questions, I think, because the next question is precisely to ask you about the tools you use. I keep hearing you participate in equity, but you also do debt. Could you talk a bit more about that, the tools that you do, how do they work?
Thank you very much. No, I think this is what makes the institution unique and quite agile. So we invest across the capital structure, something that you don't see very often. So all the way from debt to equity, straight debt, And we have done a lot with Therna Energy, with smaller companies like Papoutsanis, Hatzopoulos, a flexible packaging company in Thessaloniki, Loulis, an agribusiness client, all the way to straight equity. I mentioned a few straight equity investments, but we have also done the in-between that I mentioned, meaning we have invested convertible loan to Noval property. We have now converted to equity. We invested right before JP Morgan coming to work with Viva. We invested into a convertible loan. And you see us utilizing all the instruments available in the hands of the financial sector, either investments in bonds, direct lending, equity, convertibles. So we are quite flexible and we adjust to the needs of each project.
Excellent. Well, I see. Yeah, there's a huge portfolio of alternatives there, and you not only fund operations, whether it's with one tool or another, but you also, since you have right now these days a great knowledge of the market, you also help the local administration reach with some facilities. For instance, the RRF. How does that work? Your cooperation with the RRF, within the RRF.
I mean, we had Draghi recently calling for more competitiveness in the EU, and really you can achieve this with all these crucial, important instruments that as I said before, in the hands of financial sector can become really valuable products. RRF, the Recovery and Resilient Facility Funds, is an important element in the market right now. We are managing the loan component on behalf of the Greek government. We are managing 500 million of RRF loans. We were actually the first institution. We signed the first two projects in the market, and this is because RRF is very close to the way we operate and to our heart. And again, for people to understand, RRF loans are basically gives the ability to companies to get financing in very good terms. And I'll give you more details, but probably an example would work better. Let's say that the company has 100 million capex investment that is eligible under RRF, meaning it's green, digital, has an R&D component, M&As or exports. So you can see it's quite wide, but also in critical areas.
And also very close to what you've been doing for years, I would say.
Absolutely, absolutely. In things that for us have been a priority, has been a priority. So let's say we have 100 million. You can finance 50% of this 100 million with RRF funds that they are coming from the EU, and they can come at a very competitive rate. So if it's in areas outside Greece, and depending on the state aid rules, it can be as low as 35 bips fixed for a long period, that might be 10 years, or for project finance, 20 years. So you don't have any risk coming from the Euribor, let's say, for the 50% of the project. The 30% can come from commercial financing, so it's blending RRF funds with commercial financing priced at commercial terms, and the 20% is the borrower's own contribution. So the borrower also
additionality.
So, absolutely, and also for the borrower to have some skin in the game. And this has motivated companies to invest, because you have for a 50% of your project financing at a very competitive rate. To date, we have utilized 2/3 of our 500 million. We have utilized approximately 200 million already. As I said, we did the first two projects. We had almost 200 million total financing project for OTE in the digital pillar. We have financed Fulgor, that is in a very interesting sector, doing interconnection between RES and the grid. So you can imagine facilitating the green energy transition, because it's nice to have RES, but you need the interconnection.
That's a very important one, interconnection, the connection between RES and the grid. Huh?
Absolutely. So
fantastic thing.
And it's a cable manufacturer. We have financed with RRF, and also smaller projects with SMEs, as well as most recently we had an RRF project with Avis, a car leasing company.
So I guess that's working very, very, very fast. I think the appraisal of the activity of the country through the RRF has been very positive. I saw something in the newspapers these last few days. There is another thing that sounds to me very interesting, which is the PPP facility. We had Nikos Sergis in the podcast a few weeks ago. I think that's a very interesting initiative that you had there. Is this rather funding? Is it policy dialogue? What have you done there with the unit?
Yeah, no, indeed. I heard Nikos' podcast was very interesting. For those who haven't heard, they can go back and do it. He gives a lot of context of what the government is trying to do on the PPPs. Our role there is to do everything on the preparation until we bring the PPPs to the market. Of course, as EBRD, we are able to finance some of the projects coming to the market, but we keep Chinese walls, because projects come to the market and all participants are able to finance them. But we are managing the whole process, pre-feasibility, bring it to completion. So we have experts, we have a team on the ground working here in our offices that they are managing this facility. And as I said before, we are talking about 13 projects, 2.5 billion worth of investments that will be coming in the market within the next few years. And we might, as an institution, be able to finance. The critical thing is the areas, as we mentioned before, that those PPP refer to: irrigation projects, waste management, social infrastructure, so in critical infrastructure areas.
I think the role that you're having there is quite amazing. There were, of course, PPPs like we have them all around earlier on, I would say, in transport infrastructure in the 2000s. Some Spanish companies actually participate in those. I think there was maybe a period where those were not that developed, elaborated, attractive, whatever, but I think they're back very strong with the job you're doing jointly with the PPP unit.
Jorge, what has been important is that we are preparing those PPPs in line with EBRD standards. So there is a comfort in the market that the highest standards in terms of environmental preparation are there and have been stamped by EBRD. So this has been an element that has added to the success of this novel framework we have developed with the Greek government.
I think there's a big point on that, right? The signature, the coming along with EBRD, those projects are they're maybe easier to understand for the potential companies interested. I wanted to ask you. You mentioned before, in several moments of the conversation, the way you get coordinated with other actors, other players in the market. How do you get coordinated with the European Investment Bank, with the Hellenic Development Bank for Investments, the European Commission, all those big players? You've talked about private equity, probably with some of them. You've talked about big projects. You talked about RRF, which is also being helped or pushed by the EIB as well. How do you guys get coordinated?
First of all, the good thing is that we speak the same language, so which leads to the fact that we can work very well together. So most of the times with all these institutions that you mentioned, the EIB, EIF, HDBI, we work together in financing projects hand in hand. We have many examples with the EIB. We have financed the 14 regional airports. We have co-financed the CCGT of Mytilineos. And many other initiatives that we have worked together. With HDBI, we see that HDBI has motivated the local private equity market to thrive. We see a lot of opportunities, and the fact that HDBI is there provides a motivation for local private equity firms to be established, and we have been in many transactions together. A recent example is our very recent example. Yes, apologies, I said it already. Is our participation in Halcyon. The local private equity is actually the first one led by women. Those initiatives are also crucial for us. We support gender equality across our projects. Mainly, you see us often in financing opportunities together across many sectors.
You share risks. You pick different tranches and share risks in different sectors. Now that comes now when you mention it quite clear to me. I wanted to ask also, so the Spanish companies are showing interest in different sectors in the country. They're showing interest in many of them, but very specifically in transport infrastructures. You mentioned the 14 airports, regional airports that you participated, which privatization you participated in time away, also in railways, but they're also interested in waste, water, tourism, digital. Is there potential for further interaction in those sectors? Do they have a capacity to interact with the EBRD within those sectors? How would they reach you? How would they act?
And Jorge, you mentioned all the areas in which Spanish companies might be interested, but what I also want to say is that Spanish companies, given their sophistication, can also bring expertise to our countries. I'm here as head of Greece, but as I said before, EBRD is investing in 40 economies. So we would love to see Spanish sponsors coming into our markets. We are, as an institution, support FDI, and especially from strong countries that bring expertise. We know sectors you mentioned in which Spanish companies have expertise, and we would love to see, technologies transfer between countries. We are here to support, as I said, us investing across the capital structure. We can co-invest with a Spanish company coming into Greece in areas that you mentioned. We can support them with equity. We see very often sponsors hesitate to enter a new country, and as I mentioned before, we are in all these jurisdictions that political stability is not always given. And as I mentioned, we came in 2015. FDI at the time in the country was suppressed. So when sponsors see that EBRD is there and can de-risk part of the project, they are willing to go ahead. So we would love to work with Spanish companies across all our operations. Our headquarters are in London, but we actually have offices in all these countries. And in all these countries that I mentioned, we are very often the largest institutional investor. So we have firepower and ability and also willingness to support all these economies, and we would love to see Spanish companies. And historically, you know very well, Spanish companies have worked with EBRD in their, as I said before, sponsoring and working on projects in our countries, but also on the advisory side. We have many Spanish advisors. We need a lot of advisors in niche areas. An example in Greece is that, we were looking for an advisor in a very niche area, in soap manufacturing. We had to look globally to find advisors. So if there is a party interested, so please come in touch with us through you or in any other country to enroll you in this program and make Spanish advisors be visible within EBRD and for many opportunities that they are coming in our countries.
I think, that's actually the way to interact, to cooperate. Some of them come over, and of course, when there is further discussion to be held on some sectors and potential investments, I tend to lead them to the multilateral financial institutions, particularly EBRD, which has a great experience in the country and knows from early on stages to then in some sectors how to do things and where the opportunities might be, and they could be actually funding those. Same goes for advisories. I will have them well updated. And you've talked about blending with other international financial institutions. Here, my question is, we also have, of course, Spain has different financial instruments that tend to fund, I would say, usually a Spanish interest, so exports from Spain or investments from Spanish companies. Do you think there could be eventually a way of blending using those instruments, those financial instruments, which could go from direct lending, senior debt and equity to pure coverage, somehow with the instruments of EBRD?
Absolutely. I think what we are missing and we want to see more is ideas and projects and innovation. So how to implement these blending, we discussed before, and you also gave so many good ideas. What we are missing is, the innovation and the willingness to invest. If we have those two, we are an institution that we are flexible, we adjust, we have done this historically many times, and we have pioneering in different areas. So please bring to us ideas in our countries, and we are willing to look at them, and I'm sure will lead to success. So Spanish companies, please come to Greece or in our countries, and we will be there for you.
We will keep them well informed. This podcast is part of it, and I thank you very much for participating. Let me just briefly mention some of the things that we went through in the conversation. You reminded us that the bank has already invested 8.3 billion euros, if I recall correctly, in 130 projects. Well, it's a very important participation in the funding of the country. You reminded us that the bank will be very soon a green bank. It's already a green bank by the majority of operations, I think. You talked about financing and policy dialogue, which is something that I think, two concepts that I think should go hand in hand, because it's the right way to help develop the economies and countries. And in the policy dialogue, you mentioned offshore wind, which actually is something that we are very close to. We have very companies with big potential that are giants worldwide in this sort of activity. You talk about private equity, you talk about support of FDI, you talk about the technology that comes with FDI. We talked about the RRF and your role, about the PPP facility, which I think has boosted the capacity of bringing operations to the market by the country. The way you coordinate yourself with other players, and the potential cooperation with Spanish companies and with Spanish financial instruments. For all of that, I thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to listen to you, to share this time in the podcast with you. Thank you so much, Angeliki.
Thank you very much, Jorge. It was a great summary. We could talk for longer, but we wanted to give an idea of what is EBRD and what we have done in Greece, and this was a great summary, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks again. Y nosotros nos vemos de nuevo pronto en Oportunidades en Grecia. Aún queda mucho por conocer del país. En próximos capítulos trataremos del canal Contract de turismo, hablaremos con la Comisión Europea una vez más, del PRTIR. Hasta pronto.